She couldn't understand why she, better looking and in her view more intelligent and harder working and everything, should be the queen. And she hated the idea that she and Harry were relegated so far down the order. Uh,
She believed she should be queen, not a duchess, not a working royal, not simply a member of the family by marriage. Queen, the next Queen of England. And according to one of Britain's most forensic royal biographers, a man who has spent years inside the machinery of the palace, speaking to the people who actually know that obsession was not merely an idle fantasy, it was reported directly to the late Queen Elizabeth herself by a trusted member of the British establishment, before the ink was even dry on the wedding certificate. That is where we begin today. And frankly, once you understand that single extraordinary fact that the woman Meghan Markle believed she should supersede was Catherine, Princess of Wales, and that this belief was so vivid, so consuming, that it had to be reported to the monarch, everything else about this story snaps into focus. Every calculated move, every strategic appearance, every performance of victimhood. It all makes a different kind of sense. Tom Bower's book, Betrayal, is a forensic autopsy of 7 years of deception. And in a remarkable conversation that aired recently, Bower laid out in extraordinary detail exactly what he found inside the palace walls, the secret meetings, the private warnings, the moments of revelation that the official version of this story has never once acknowledged. What you are about to hear has been buried under years of carefully managed narrative. But Tom Bower, to his very great credit, dug it all up. So let us begin at the beginning, because the story of Meghan Markle's obsession with the throne did not begin with the Oprah interview. It did not begin with the departure from Britain. It began, and this is what makes it so breathtaking, before she was even officially part of the family. Before the vows, before the dress, before the cameras turned on that glorious May morning at Windsor Castle, the establishment knew, the warnings were issued, and they were ignored.
This establishment figure reported to the Queen that Meghan thinks that once she marries into the royal family, she's going to be God.
Yeah, exactly.
which is pretty hilarious. But clearly, she believed it. Clearly, she thought, and I've come to the conclusion, helped by others on the inside, that she really thought she, rather than Kate, should be the next Queen after Charles.
To understand the magnitude of what Tom Bower reveals, you have to understand what the British royal family actually is. Not as a tourist attraction, not as a tabloid soap opera, but as an institution, ancient, constitutional, and built on the most rigorous sense of duty and order that this country has ever produced. Every person who marries into it does so with the understanding that their own ambitions, their own desires, their own conception of their rightful place in the world must be subordinated to something far larger than themselves. Catherine understood this. She waited years, patiently, gracefully, without complaint. She married William knowing precisely what her role would be, and she stepped into it with a dignity that has never once wavered, not through personal illness, not through public scandal, not through the extraordinary provocation of watching her own sister-in-law attempt to destroy her from 3,000 miles away. Catherine's conduct has been, and continues to be, extraordinary. Meghan Markle walked in with an entirely different set of expectations. And what Tom Bower has uncovered through years of painstaking research, through sources at the very highest levels of the British establishment, is that those expectations were far more extraordinary than anyone has previously reported. The Queen was told. The warnings were documented. The marriage was seen, by those who knew, as one that was simply not going to last in Britain, not because of anything the royal family did wrong, but because the woman Harry had chosen had no intention of playing by any rules other than her own. And at the heart of it all, beneath the campaigns for female empowerment, beneath the carefully curated looks of serenity and grace, beneath the Netflix specials and the lifestyle branding, and the jam was something rather more raw, rather more naked, a belief that she deserved more, that she had been somehow cheated. That the woman standing between her and the crown, quiet, elegant, unshakable Catherine, was an obstacle rather than a colleague, and that the institution which had placed Catherine above her was an institution that had fundamentally misunderstood who Meghan Markle was and what she was owed. Bower's account begins with a detail that has been almost entirely overlooked in the years of coverage surrounding this family. Before Meghan married Harry, months before the wedding, a very senior, very well-connected member of the British establishment was brought in to prepare her, to explain what her life would look like, what her duties would be, what the royal family would expect of her. This was not an unusual process. New members of the family receive guidance. It is part of how the institution protects itself and welcomes those who join it. This particular figure met with Meghan regularly, every 3 to 4 weeks, Bauer tells us, at Kensington Palace itself. The meetings were designed to ease the transition, to walk this American actress through the centuries of protocol, expectation, and service that would now define her days. It was a remarkable act of institutional generosity, a private tutorial in what it means to be royal, offered freely and with great care by someone who had devoted their own life to understanding it. And what did this establishment figure discover, very quickly, in those sessions? That Meghan had absolutely no intention of absorbing any of it, no intention of following the guidance offered, no intention of staying, not in any meaningful sense, not in the sense the royal family understood staying to mean, which is to say, with loyalty, with service, with the graceful subordination of self that royalty demands. The conclusion reached, and reported to the Queen, was devastating. This was a marriage that was not going to last in Britain. That was the verdict, before the wedding had even taken place.
Before she gets married, meets a very, very famous, important member of the British establishment. And that person is brought in every 3 to 4 weeks to Kensington Palace to tell Meghan about what her duties will be and how her life will follow her marriage to Harry, a part of the royal family. And that person very quickly discovered that Meghan was not going to obey any rules, she had no intention of staying, and that she was going to be a huge problem.
But the establishment warning was not the only thing reported to the Queen before that wedding day. There was something else, something that speaks even more directly to the nature of the woman Harry had chosen, to her capacity for manipulation, to the distance between the version of herself she presented to the world and the one that actually existed behind the careful costuming. Thomas Markle, the father, the man the world watched, bewildered and heartbroken, as his daughter's wedding approached, and his role in it was first confirmed, then withdrawn, then publicly agonized over in a performance of filial grief that moved many viewers to genuine sympathy. Here was a daughter, the story went, devastated that her father could not walk her down the aisle. Here was a family situation made tragic by outside interference by paparazzi, by manipulation, by the cruel machinery of the tabloid press. Except that, according to Tom Bauer, and this is where the story becomes something quite different, Meghan had decided she did not want her father at the wedding months before any of that drama unfolded. Not because of the staged photographs, not because of the heart attack, months before any of it. She had already made her decision. Thomas Markle was, in her estimation, an embarrassment. A man too ordinary for the world she had entered, a reminder of a life she had left behind and had no intention of acknowledging. And there is a detail that makes this even more revealing. Bauer notes that Meghan never once introduced Harry to her father. This was not a logistical challenge. Thomas Markle lived in Mexico, barely a 2-hour drive from Los Angeles. They could have met easily, quietly, privately. The fact that they never did was not an accident. It was a decision. Meghan did not want Harry to meet her father because she did not want her father anywhere near the life she was building. He was not part of the plan. The wedding photo opportunity she wanted was not one that included Thomas Markle. It was one that included the Clooneys.
She hoped her father would not come to the wedding. This is months before the wedding actually took place. And we know the whole story about the father having the heart attack and at the last minute bailing out. But she deliberately announced she did not want her father to lead her down the aisle in St. George's Chapel months before it happened. So that shows you exactly how she manipulated the father to, in the end, selling his pictures to a paparazzi and giving interviews. She manipulated the hostility between herself and Harry and the father, and it quite shocked the royal family.
Now we arrive at the heart of it. The revelation that sits at the centre of everything Tom Bauer has uncovered, the one that reframes not just Meghan's behaviour, but the entire arc of what the Sussex story has actually been about. Because once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. It changes the lens through which everything else is viewed. The establishment figure who had been brought in to prepare Meghan for royal life made a report to the Queen directly. And what that report contained was this: Meghan Markle believed that once she married into the royal family, she would essentially become its most important member. More than that, she believed she, rather than Catherine, should be the next queen after Charles. She could not understand, Bower tells us, why she, in her own estimation, better looking, more intelligent, more capable, harder working, should be relegated to the position she actually occupied. She hated it. The word Bower uses is hate. She hated being so far down the order of succession. She hated the protocol that placed Catherine above her at every public engagement. She hated the deference the institution showed to William and Catherine as the future of the monarchy, when in her own private accounting, she was the one who deserved that position. This was not a passing frustration. This was a fixed belief, a consuming one, and it was reported to the monarch herself before the marriage had even been celebrated.
She couldn't understand why she, better looking and in her view more intelligent and harder working and everything, should be the queen. And she hated the idea that she and Harry were relegated so far down the order.
Think about what that means for a moment, because we have spent years being told a very different story, that Meghan came to Britain in good faith, that she tried her hardest, that the institution failed her, that the family was cold and unwelcoming, and incapable of supporting a modern woman of colour. That is the version sold to Oprah. That is the version in the Netflix documentary. That is the version Harry repeated in Spare. Those pages and pages and pages of grievance dressed up as memoir. But here is what Tom Bower's sources tell us was actually happening inside Kensington Palace while that narrative was being assembled. A woman who believed she deserved the crown, who had been quietly, methodically positioning herself not as a partner to the institution, but as its rightful inheritor, who looked at Catherine, serene, beloved, graceful Catherine, the woman who will one day be queen, and saw not a colleague but a competitor she was losing to. Tom Bower is not, it must be said, a man given to exaggeration. He is one of Britain's most rigorous investigative biographers. His books on Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Robert Maxwell, these are works of forensic journalism, built on sources, built on documentation, built on the kind of painstaking research that takes years rather than months. When he makes a claim, it is because he has done the work. When he identifies a source as credible, it is because he has tested that credibility against everything else he has found. And in this book, Betrayal, he has done something rather extraordinary. He has gone through hours and hours of footage, the public appearances, the speeches, the tours of Nigeria, Colombia, the Invictus Games appearances, not the snapshots, not the curated moments, the full hours. And what those hours reveal, Bower says, is a picture completely at odds with the one the Sussexes have sold.
I've gone through hours and hours of all these videos, which no one else has. And you just see whether it's Nigeria or Colombia or in the US or wherever, the image when you don't see the snapshot is always of two people who try and put on a great show. She especially, he smiles, but there's complete emptiness behind his smile.
It's true. He looks lost.
Lost. That is the word Bower uses about Harry. And it is a word that contains within it an entire tragedy. The tragedy of a man who gave up his country, his family, his identity and his purpose for a woman whose ambitions he did not fully understand, in service of a project whose destination he could not see. Harry, in Bower's telling, is not a villain. He is something rather more pitiable than that. He is a man of very limited intellect, to use Bower's precise phrase, who was drawn into an orbit from which he has never been able to escape. Meghan, by contrast, always knew exactly what she was doing. The control, the management of his public appearances, the sharp look across a room when he was about to say something wrong, the hand on the arm when she needed to redirect a conversation. These were not the actions of a supportive wife gently steadying an anxious husband. They were, in Bower's reading, the actions of someone who understood that Harry was a liability she had to manage, a man whose instinct for saying the wrong thing threatened a project she had built with very great care. There is a moment in the transcript that stops you cold. A mental health conference in New York. The subject matter, the very thing Harry has built his public identity around: the crisis of children's mental health in the digital age, the harms of social media, the duty of the powerful to act. This is Harry's territory. This is the cause he has championed. And at this conference, someone asked him the obvious question: what is the solution? Harry said, "I don't know." 2 words. At a conference dedicated to the very issue he was there to champion, he said, "I don't know." And Bauer, who has seen the footage, describes what happened next. Meghan jumping in to rescue him, not gently, not as a supportive gesture between equals. She took over, as she always takes over. Because Harry, in Bauer's unsparing assessment, has very limited intellect and cannot be trusted to hold a position he has publicly staked his name to.
He has very limited intellect. He's out of his depth. And Meghan is intelligent. She knows exactly what she's trying to do and what she's trying to promote, and doesn't want Harry making a mess of it, which he invariably does. And that's the important thing about this book.
This is the pattern, and it repeats itself across every public appearance Bauer has examined. In Colombia, Bauer describes Harry sitting at receptions and meals with the look, unmistakably, of a man who had absolutely no idea what was happening around him, in part because the conversations were in Spanish, which he does not speak, but also in part because the whole enterprise was not designed for him. It was designed around Meghan. For Meghan, Harry was there as backdrop, as legitimacy, as the royal name that opened the doors she wanted opened. And Bauer documents something else from that Colombian trip that is rather telling. Meghan changed her outfit at least 4 or 5 times a day. Every change was accompanied by a link, always a link to where the item could be purchased. A commission for every click. Here was the Duchess of Sussex, conducting what was presented as a humanitarian visit, turning her wardrobe into a shopping channel. The audiences at her speeches, Bauer notes, were always tiny. The gap between the projected image and the reality on the ground was, in every single instance, enormous. You cannot tell this story without addressing Spare, the book, the memoir, the extraordinary, unprecedented act of a working royal or a former working royal putting into print the most intimate, most damaging, most bewildering account of his own family that has ever been published. A book that named names, that revisited arguments, that described physical altercations, that counted the number of times a certain word appeared in the index. 8 times, since you are asking. Bauer counted. But what Tom Bauer has discovered about the making of that book is perhaps more revealing than anything within it. The process, according to his source at Random House, who was deeply involved in the editing, was chaotic, fractious, divisive, and counterproductive. The ghostwriter, J.R. Moehringer, one of America's most celebrated memoirists, ultimately wrote a book that was, in Bauer's telling, as much about Moehringer's own emotional landscape as it was about Harry's. Harry, we are told, misunderstood himself so profoundly that the ghostwriter ended up writing Moehringer's psychological journey and placing Harry's name on the cover.
No one wanted to work with Harry ever again, least of all the ghostwriter, from what I was told. And the reason is that Harry used the book not only to unload himself and seek huge damage against his family, but also because he misunderstood his own background. He had misunderstood himself. Yeah. And the ghostwriter, Moehringer, really in the end wrote a book which was about his own life, but he put it into Harry's life. He was utterly confused.
And here is the detail that makes all of this so much stranger. That book was originally meant to be published before the Queen died. Before, Harry had no intention of waiting for his grandmother's death, before releasing a volume of grievances so raw, so personal, so damaging to the family she had given her life to serve. It was only the timing of her passing that delayed it, and according to Bauer's research, nothing of substance was changed when it finally arrived. The content was what it always was, including, apparently, material so extreme that Random House itself insisted it be removed. He was going to publish that book in the Queen's lifetime, with the knowledge that she would read it, with the knowledge that his accounts of arguments and altercations and deeply private moments would reach a woman in her 90s who had spent 70 years in service to this country and to this institution, and he would have pocketed the money regardless. That single fact tells you more about who Harry has become than anything else in this story. Let us talk about Colombia, because among all the strange chapters in the Sussex story, The Columbia trip stands as something particularly extraordinary in its gap between presentation and reality. Meghan and Harry were invited by the Colombian vice president, a woman who, Bauer tells us, had risen from genuinely impoverished circumstances to one of the highest offices in her country. A remarkable story of female achievement, exactly the kind of thing Meghan claims to champion. The vice president believed the Sussexes would contribute meaningfully to her charitable causes, that their presence would raise significant funds. What did they actually leave behind? Around $8,000. Not 800,000, not 80,000, 8,000, a fraction so small compared to what the vice president had expected that Bauer describes her as ultimately leaking details of the trip in evident frustration. And those leaked details are rather interesting, because the question of who paid for the private jet there is no commercial travel for the Sussexes, as Bauer dryly notes led back to the Soros Foundation, or an entity linked to it. The vice president's office was the source of that information, and the Sussexes, by all accounts, were not at all pleased to have the association made public. The trip had been intended to bolster Meghan's brand as a humanitarian and a fashion icon. The revelation that it had been funded by a controversial billionaire's charitable network sat rather awkwardly with that image.
Meghan used it to promote her fashion lines. She changed clothes at least 4 or 5 times a day, and there was always a link how to buy the accessory or the dress or whatever, on which she would get a commission. And what was ridiculous about it all was the speeches. I mean, the audiences were always tiny. Meghan speaks about female empowerment and how the Colombian women had to rise up. And next to her was the vice president, a woman who had come from the most impoverished background imaginable, who had reached, so to speak, near the top. So as always, Meghan was absolutely tone deaf, especially when she then went into the long diatribes about how wonderful her daughter Lilibet was.
And Bauer's account of Meghan's speeches in Colombia contains a detail that is, in its own quiet way, rather devastating. She stood before audiences of children who did not know where their next meal was coming from, children living in genuine poverty, in a country with genuine hardship, and she told them to pursue joy. Pursue joy. Bauer's verdict on this moment is precise and unsparing. She was, he says, absolutely tone deaf. The gap between what was needed and what she offered was the gap between substance and performance. And performance, in every setting Bauer examined, always won. The Oprah Winfrey interview. Let us be quite direct about this. That interview, broadcast to tens of millions of viewers around the world, presented a specific version of events as uncontested truth. Meghan knew nothing of royal protocol before she married. She received no help, no guidance, no training. Nobody explained anything to her. She was cast adrift in a cold institution that neither welcomed nor supported her. Tom Bauer's book contradicts this directly, because what he documents through his establishment source, the person who met with Meghan every 3 to 4 weeks at Kensington Palace, is that not only did Meghan receive guidance, she actively refused it. She was not abandoned. She was briefed, carefully and privately, by someone who devoted considerable time and care to preparing her, and she dismissed every word. She had already decided who she was going to be and what she was going to do, and no amount of patient instruction was going to alter that plan.
That contradicts the Oprah Winfrey interview. This contradicts this thing she said. I was never trained. I didn't know how to do this. Well, you've got a testimony from somebody that's like, I tried to work intimately with her and she just dismissed me. She dismissed everything I said. And when it comes to her father, I had never read that before. I always painted Thomas Markle as the victim. Somebody approached him and said, let me rebrand you. And he fell for it. But I didn't know, so thank you for telling me, and thank you for writing that in the book, that Meghan's ultimate objective was never to have her father there. He was an embarrassment to her. She felt like she was a little too big for her family once she moved into the royal circle.
Then there is the car chase, the New York car chase, which the Sussexes described as near catastrophic, as a terrifying pursuit through the streets of Manhattan that lasted hours and endangered not just themselves but members of the public. The police precinct they claimed to have entered denied they had ever come into the building, denied they had provided protection, denied there had been any danger at all. And yet the story was told and retold, and used, Bauer reveals, as a deliberate attempt to influence a judge in London who was hearing Harry's application for state-funded protection when he visited Britain. The car chase, in Bauer's reading, was theatre, an extraordinary, carefully staged piece of theatre designed to prove a point about Harry's security needs in a British courtroom. The judge was not persuaded. Harry lost the case. He is now appealing because he cannot afford the private protection required when he visits, and he still wants the status, the security, the deference, the treatment of a full working royal. A status he gave up, a status he appears to believe he can have both ways. At some point in this story, one's thoughts turn to the children. Archie, who is 6 years old, Lilibet, who is 3. Two small people who will one day be old enough to read the books, watch the interviews, understand the choices that were made in their names and on their behalf. And one wonders, quietly, what they will make of all of it. Because the Bauer book makes clear that Meghan's obsession was never really about Harry's happiness, or the children's well-being, or the cause of female empowerment, or any of the other frameworks through which the Sussex story has been publicly narrated. It was about Meghan, her position, her status, her legacy, her place in history, the Columbia trip with the clothing links and the commission income, the Oprah interview designed to destroy rather than to explain, the Netflix documentary that turned personal pain into content. All of it in service of a single project, the construction and maintenance of the Meghan Markle brand.
She got everything she wanted, and then knew what she wanted and couldn't get, and that was a lot. That's why, of course, she never intended to stay.
Oh, that is so true.
More to the point, make a fortune out of trashing the royal family. And that, of course, is the whole point of the book, betrayal. She is now paying the price of her betrayal.
Isn't that the truth? Since Meghan had refused the Queen's invitation to Balmoral in the Queen's lifetime, she was unwelcome there at her death. I thought that's a really powerful sentence as well. Why would Meghan think she was welcome there? I mean, such a bizarre insistence from her to want to be at Balmoral when things are going south, when she had been such a viper.
Well, because she wanted to be there for the photo opportunity. She knew it was a historic moment. She wanted to be there to show that she was as important as Kate, and that she was part of the family.
Consider what Bauer reveals about Meghan's response to the cancer diagnoses of both King Charles and Catherine, Princess of Wales. That terrible period when two members of the royal family were facing serious illness, and the whole country held its breath, was apparently a moment of calculation rather than compassion in the Montecito mansion. Bauer is careful with his words here. He cannot provide an eyewitness account, but he is quite clear that he does not believe there was much sorrow, and he notes that it was the Montecito PR machine that most viciously attacked Catherine during her illness, questioning whether she was real, whether her photograph had been doctored, whether the woman spotted with William on a shopping trip was genuinely her. These attacks on a woman receiving cancer treatment came from somewhere. They were not spontaneous. And Bauer's implication, carefully drawn, is that the Sussex orbit, whether directly or indirectly, was not uninvolved. Catherine, through all of it, said nothing. She has never once publicly criticised the Sussexes. The contrast in character is, frankly, extraordinary. There is a moment in Bauer's account that deserves particular attention, a moment of institutional decision-making that has never been fully reported. 1 week before the Oprah Winfrey interview was broadcast, the palace became aware of its contents. A trusted source at ITV in London, which had acquired the British rights from CBS, provided the palace with what was coming, and the palace decided to act. 4 days before the broadcast, a memorandum appeared in the Times. The Fawcett Memorandum, the documented record of allegations of bullying against Meghan's former staff. This was not a coincidence of timing. Bauer is quite direct about his reading of events. The leak was approved. A document known only to 3 or 4 people does not make its way to one of Britain's most respected newspapers by accident. Someone with authority signed off. And Bauer's conclusion is that William authorized it.
1 week before the Oprah Winfrey program was broadcast, the palace discovered the contents from a trusted source at ITV in London. The station had bought the rights from CBS. The palace decided to retaliate first. 4 days before the broadcast, Prince William apparently authorized the leaking of Jason Knopf's memorandum about Meghan's alleged bullying to her staff to the Times. I don't know if I knew it was Prince William. Was that new news, or am I just a little late to the party?
There's no doubt they'd heard it. They got the lowdown when the tape arrived. As for the Knopf memorandum, of course, the man who revealed that, Valentine Lowe, has always insisted he got it through perfectly legitimate and great journalistic resources, which I'm sure is actually true.
Yeah.
But also, Kensington Palace has always insisted that it couldn't have been leaked. And it's quite clear from that, in my view, that the leak had to be approved. There's no way that Knauf's memo, which was only seen by, in the end, 3 or 4 people, would have been leaked if William hadn't approved.
Now, there is a nuance here that Bauer is careful to acknowledge. A very senior official at Buckingham Palace from the rival court, as Bauer puts it, the palace machinery that sits apart from Kensington Palace's operation thought the leak was most unfortunate, counterproductive. The palaces, with their different interests and different loyalties, did not always agree. That internal disagreement is itself a window into just how complicated the institutional response to the Sussexes was, and continues to be. But here is the broader point. The institution did not simply absorb the blows. It was not passive. It made decisions. And those decisions, taken at the highest levels, were designed to protect the monarchy from a threat that those inside understood far more clearly than the public has ever been allowed to see. The pre-warning about Meghan's intentions before the wedding, the reporting to the Queen, the authorized leak before Oprah. The palace knew what it was dealing with from the very beginning. Princess Anne, and one does love Princess Anne for her absolute refusal to dress anything up, made a prediction. According to Bauer, Anne told a friend, before all of this became what it became, that Meghan was gripped by what she called red carpet fever. Nothing, Anne said, would deter her search for the spotlight. That was the diagnosis delivered by the one member of the royal family who has perhaps the sharpest eye for authenticity of any of them. Red carpet fever, a hunger for visibility so consuming that no institutional constraint, no personal obligation, no family loyalty could compete with it.
Princess Anne predicted to a friend exactly what would follow. Meghan, she said, was gripped by red carpet fever. Nothing, it seemed, would deter her search for the spotlight. Wow, what a prediction from our favorite royal. I mean, yeah. That's it. I couldn't believe after that incredible Variety piece that within hours, Meghan Markle was on a red carpet in Los Angeles. Anyone in their right mind would duck and hide when what hits the fan. And Meghan is just, and you've said this before, she's relentless, she's resilient, but to a point where I'm like, is there mental illness involved?
The brand audit episode deserves its own moment. Dr. Sophie Chanduka, brought in to revive the Sussex charitable operation, to put it on a more modern footing, to make it work, presented Harry with an analytics review. This is standard practice. Organisations do this routinely. Boards commission polls. Metrics are assessed. The data is used to make improvements. Dr. Chanduka showed Harry the data on how his own behaviour had damaged his public image. And his response? He claimed psychological harm. A grown man, a man who has publicly championed mental health awareness, who has spoken at length about the importance of honest self-examination, who has sat with veterans and encouraged them to process their most difficult experiences, told Dr. Chanduka that her audit had left him with psychological damage. He was traumatized, apparently, by being shown a spreadsheet about his own declining approval ratings.
Pathetic. Not so funny, it's actually tragic. What Harry revealed by that is a complete lack of any self-awareness, of any understanding of reality. He just behaved as the arrogant royal.
And then, Bauer notes, came the polo match. The famous polo match, as he calls it, where Meghan herself, not Harry, Meghan essentially declared war on Dr. Chanduka. The woman who had been brought in to help them, who had worked in good faith to improve their standing, who had presented honest data and been told she had caused psychological harm, was then publicly undermined by the Duchess of Sussex at a sporting event. Dr. Chanduka has found all of this very difficult. That is, as Bauer observes, rather an understatement. Where do Meghan and Harry stand now? Bauer's answer is unsparing. The victimhood narrative, the engine that powered everything, the fuel for the Oprah interview and the Netflix documentary in Spare, and every appearance on every stage in every country has run out of road. The American public, which Bauer understands well, likes a comeback story. It does not like a perpetual grievance. And what the Sussexes have been selling for years now is perpetual grievance without resolution, suffering without growth, complaint without change. The people who rallied around them in the early years, the Stacey Abramses and the Michelle Obamas and the Hillary Clintons, have quietly disappeared. This is not coincidence. It is the natural behavior of people who operate at the stratosphere of power and fame. The moment there is any hint of weakness, any suggestion that association with a particular name might cost more than it gains, they move on. There is no longer any reason, Bauer says, for those people to be seen with the Sussexes. Their fame and glory and infamy has passed.
The real problem for Meghan and Harry is they've got nothing to offer other than their victimhood and the story they've now told. And Harry is a glad hander. He's there to make children and servicemen happy. He is not there to pontificate endlessly and repeatedly about mental illness, of which he has no, other than his personal alleged traumas he's discussed endlessly. Meghan doesn't talk anyway about substantial things. I mean, there isn't anything more she can say. And that's the whole point about this saga, that their existence is a threat to the British royal family, because they can only survive by damaging the royal family and saying negative things. And so how does it end?
Bauer is asked about the Netflix series Meghan's attempt to reinvent herself as a lifestyle and cooking personality, the great hope that she might become, as he puts it, another Martha. His answer is worth sitting with. For all of Meghan's resilience, he says, for all her ambition, for all her extraordinary capacity to survive public humiliation and reappear, perfectly dressed, with a smile in place, there is no mystery, there is no talent, there is nothing that creates the magnetic pull of a genuine star. She is, in Bauer's precise and rather devastating assessment, a B-movie actress who did not make it, married extraordinarily well, but cannot deliver the magic a star requires. And every time she steps out in Colombia, in Nigeria, in the pages of Variety, she reveals herself, Bauer says, to be rather ordinary. The great problem, the hollow at the center of the brand. Tom Bauer ends his analysis with an image, a car crash. Not the staged one in New York, the real one. The metaphorical collision that he believes is coming, that he believes is inevitable, but whose precise route cannot be predicted, because the fundamental problem has not been solved. The Sussexes have an extremely expensive lifestyle to maintain. They have no reliable income stream. Netflix has delivered one documentary, one cooking series, one podcast empire that imploded spectacularly. The victimhood narrative has, as Bauer says, run out of road. And what remains? What is left once the story has been told, the books have been written, the interviews have been given, the accusations made, the bridges burned? What do you sell when the thing you were selling was your pain, and the audience has decided it has heard enough? Harry, Bauer observes, is essentially a man of goodwill. He makes children and veterans happy, and that is genuinely valuable. But he is not a man who can pontificate endlessly about mental health when his only credentials are his own alleged traumas, discussed so many times that the telling has become its own kind of damage. And Meghan, for all her extraordinary survival instincts, for all her ability to disappear when the humiliation is too great and reappear when the moment is right, is running out of reinventions. The Hollywood A-list has not materialized. The political connections have not produced the platform she wanted. The lifestyle brand is competing in a market full of people with more authentic stories. And the one thing she had, the royal connection, the title, the access, was the thing she walked away from. Or rather, was the thing the institution, having been warned before the wedding, allowed to expire on its own terms.
There's a car crash coming, but we don't know the route to it. This is a moral story that you can get glory for 5 minutes, but when the flame goes out, you're in great trouble. And that, in the end, is why she shouldn't have betrayed all those people who trusted her.
There is one final detail in Bower's book that deserves mention before we close. King Charles, we are told, secretly completed his own book, his own account of the marriage, of the betrayal, of the extraordinary years since Harry and Meghan left Britain. It exists. It has been seen. It is in a vault, sealed, waiting. Bower is quite clear that we will not see it in our lifetimes, but it exists. A monarch's private record of a family catastrophe, locked away from public view, available perhaps to historians generations from now. And one cannot help but wonder quietly, privately, what it contains, what a king saw and chose not to say. Tom Bower has spent years doing what the official version of this story has never done, looking at the evidence, speaking to the people who were actually in those rooms, sitting through hours of footage that show what happens when the cameras are left running and the managed moments give way to unguarded reality. And what he has found, assembled into a single forensic account, is a story of betrayal on a scale the British royal family has rarely, if ever, experienced. A woman who came to Britain not to serve but to conquer, who saw Catherine, the future queen, not as a colleague but as an obstacle, who believed was reported to believe to the Queen herself that she should be the one with the crown, who manipulated, managed, and eventually abandoned every obligation she had accepted, all in service of a brand that, by Tom Bower's reckoning, is now in serious and perhaps irreversible decline. And yet, and this is perhaps the most haunting part of all the car crash Bower predicts, has not yet happened. Meghan survives, Harry follows, the flame has dimmed but not gone out, and the royal family endures, as it always has, with the quiet dignity that has always been its greatest strength. William and Catherine continue to do the work. Charles continues to lead. The institution that Meghan wanted to reshape in her own image remains, fundamentally, what it always was. And she is in Montecito, making jam. And when you step back and look at everything Tom Bower is putting on the table, it really makes you wonder what's actually been going on behind the scenes this whole time. Because if even a fraction of these claims are true, then this isn't just about ambition. It's about a long game that most people never even noticed. Was Meghan always aiming higher than what we were told? Did she see royal life as a stepping stone rather than a destination? And more importantly, how much of this was carefully planned from the very beginning? It raises some uncomfortable questions about motives, decisions, and the narrative that's been presented to the public for years. Because the image we see on the surface can be very different from what's happening in private circles, and if Bower's revelations are anything to go by, there may be layers to this story that haven't fully come out yet. But here's where it gets really interesting. If this obsession is real, then what does that mean for the future? Is this chapter truly closed, or is there still more to unfold? Because in situations like this, the story rarely ends where people think it does. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Tom Bower's claims, or do you think this is being blown out of proportion? Was Meghan misunderstood, or was there always a bigger plan in motion? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's really talk about it. And if you found this breakdown interesting, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who's been following this story too. Because trust me, the more you dig into this, the more surprising it gets.